Okay, in the interest of expediency, I'm going to make a second video today. I hope you haven't had enough from me, but I'm going to basically give you the rundown of what Orthodoxy tends to think about war and what is the proper balanced way to think about war. So I'm going to read you my notes, not very long notes. I hope I'm going to like finish this before the 20-minute mark. So I'm going to just read it to you. So I'm going to start with a little bit of scripture. Scandal must happen, but woe to the person through whom it comes. Okay. The origin of war is not mere greed or explicit hatred of others, as it is often portrayed and simplified in modern media and such. War is the consequence of two different moral orders coming to a clash, two incompatible standards of justice clashing against one another after repeated confrontation. Because we live with other people, we need rules to live with other people. Different people have different ideas of how we should live. It's a natural, or rather, a natural thing in the fallen natural world. So God created a good world where nature was basically in harmony. When we fell, we threw off that balance. Nature was completely corrupted. So we have problems with one another. Now, I'm going to start with a very important definition of violence. Violence means the use of force. The word violence literally means using force, forcing. That's violence. Violence is not always evil. Laws, any law, is by definition violent. People simply call violent what they don't agree with, force that they don't agree with. Because if they were agreeing with it, they wouldn't call it violent, but it still is violent. There is a preference there. There is a value judgment. They have a preferred use of force, and the one that they don't agree with is violent. So you can already see how here there is a tension. It's like, will we go with my definition of what is just, or will we go with your definition of what is just because I believe it to be violent? So the church fathers have given in the past several justifications for war under these conditions. So, defense from invasion, defending your homeland, protection of the weak, okay, the innocent, suppression of brigandage or chaos. If there is chaos next door, it's like you have to put on something resembling justice through the use of force for the good of the other person as an act of love, and because you're responsible towards another. It's a sacramental view. It's a view of you not being apart even from your neighbors, even if they're from another nation, right? Resistance to moral corruption or societal destruction. Okay, I'm going to fight you because you're corrupted and you're leading us to corruption. Okay, this is a justification for civil war if you understand it. So upholding treaties or oaths, okay, this is a kind of weak, justification, but it's like we made a pact to protect each other. You're being invaded. I have to honor that oath. Okay, restoring order in a collapsed region, similar to chaos and brigandage. It's like, okay, but as you can see, they're all vague enough for people to try to take advantage of these conditions to justify expansion, right? So the reality is that any of these conditions are enough not to just explain, but also morally justify the existence of conflict and war eventually, right? So we're in a situation where conflict is the norm because of the fall, okay? And we have to deal with it. There are people who are strong enough to deal with it, and they have a moral responsibility to deal with it. That's why wars exist. If there are two sides and the two sides are wrong, that's an after. That's a condition that's after that. Okay, so if you believe that a neighboring country abuses children, for example, and sacrifices them to Moloch or to the Aztec gods, for example, you have to intervene. And even if you complain to them, and that's the extent of your, let's say, use of force, of your violence against them, that is conflict. That is violence. Okay. That is a clash of standards, and standards clash. So the question of war is not just about utilitarian concerns or practical concerns or even mere moral concerns, but discernment in terms of something that is both beyond the let's say, uh, pragmatic, cultural, ethic, or moral of your people, but rather whether the moral of your people is actually transcendent. Are you discerning a cause that is truly just in the eyes of God or not? Are you serving God or a petty demon? So how should we pursue our ideals of justice? What is the appropriate level of concern for this claim at this precise time? Like, can we afford to do this? Is this the correct ordering of our priorities? Like, are you actually strong enough to establish order? If not, then you shouldn't even think about like taking on that cross upon your shoulders. So is this conflict, for example, worth fighting a war about? And this is the same with people. Like, is this let's say difference with another person even worth like mentioning, or should we just like let it slide? We shouldn't fight everything just because, oh, they're wrong. That is naive and idealistic and immature. So all of this is assuming that one is in the right in the first place. As we've seen in the past, being in the wrong is definitely close to be wiped out. God has done it countless times with the pagan nations that surrounded Israel. This means that we cannot cling to a legalistic frame of self-defense. This is not the reason why holy wars are not waged on earth through politics, though, even though politics and war do participate in the spiritual war and are essential ingredients to it. People usually make the difference, like especially priests, that we do not wage holy wars because when Israel was fighting the pagan nations, that was a different time. Like, saying it's a different time is not the exact, let's say, explanation for it, though it is a valid explanation if you develop it. You have to develop it, though. So the reason why holy wars do not exist in the Orthodox tradition is that no country embodies and represents the church on earth, not like the people of Israel at the time, right? So in the Old Testament, the people of Israel, they were the church on earth. It was a nation that was against all of the other nations. They were, let's say, the manifestation of the church on earth. Okay. But no army in the world is totally composed of saints, or no nation is completely holy after the coming of Christ. So that's what changed. So no country is fighting our spiritual war on behalf of Christ. No worldly conflict is completely pure. And where sin lies, so too do demons. What these priests are saying when they're teaching that, like, those times were different from ours, they're not teaching Marcionism. Like, maybe they don't know how to express these things, but basically, what they're trying to say is that the revelation of Christ basically changed our conception of the particularity of Israel. But it doesn't change the fact that the church does have to go to war spiritually and sometimes physically. Okay. But as you know, the means that the church does it is always going to be through nations. So nations cannot claim to completely speak for the church. And that's why we do not have holy wars in Orthodoxy. Whereas the Catholic Church can claim to let's say, espouse self-justified conception of holy wars, because they are both a worldly power, and also, let's say, they make a universal claim to authority. So in their case, it would make sense for them to call for a holy war. But since they don't have a real valid church, I would say that there are no holy wars to be fought after the revelation of Christ. So it would be ethnophiletism, which is a heresy, to think that a political ruler spoke for the church univocally against another nation. because other nations often have people who participate in virtue, because other countries have Christians, and since the church cannot be against itself, the concept of a holy war in worldly terms would be ridiculous. It's like two saints cannot kill each other in the name of Christ. So when the church becomes universal in the sense of being accessible to other nations, then we cannot so cleanly separate a whole nation as being completely without God. Now, this is not exactly precise. And this line of reasoning is often extended by pacifists to think that since we are all made in the image of God, that killing is then out of the question, undermining the whole life of the church in this fallen world in the name of a Christian heretical ideal. This kind of perspective leads to quietism and dysfunctional polities, where the state does not have the sword, where the state does not have the authority to fight a war. Why? Because if a state cannot, let's say, sacrifice a criminal, execute a criminal, then on what authority does it ask you to fight on its behalf and die for it? You see, even under a secular logic, this becomes contradictory. So the nuance of how authority functions is actually very simple. It depends on bodies. Human beings are indivisible beings, persons, and they will be judged by God and by their communities. Everybody possesses some virtue, but this does not mean that we're all innocent and beyond judgment and self-justified, existing unto ourselves. We're not self-existing. So those who do not want to judge should definitely avoid judging if they cannot avoid it. But this also means not judging those whose very duty it is to judge, not abdicating the responsibility. So they say judge not, but does that mean that judges and princes and kings and politicians should not exist? We shouldn't have rulers, right? Because they're not supposed to judge. We shouldn't have parents, right? Because we're not supposed to judge. If a monk tells a judge or a king not to rule, the monk has usurped their authority. Likewise, a father ought to judge their son's actions in order to correct them, or he has abdicated the role as parents. It's like authority, discernment, and judgment are unavoidable. And I would, in fact, say that judgment is actually necessary and Christian if one has any kind of depth of discernment and any kind of knowledge of what a body is. This is even in the scriptures. Like, judge not according to appearances, but judge with right judgment. John 7:24. So when Christ is talking about not judging others, he means to say don't judge incorrectly and don't judge your equal because you're in the same place as them, spiritually speaking and politically speaking. Since the act of pointing out faults inherently implies elevating oneself and risks breaking communion when there shouldn't be a break in communion. Christ calls us to humility and to be at peace with one another. But this humility does not abolish your true roles. It is not humble to abdicate the throne, especially when the kingdom needs a ruler. It is not humble for a parent to abandon their child or to let them do whatever they want. It is not loving to let your equals destroy themselves with sin, even if it seems proud to correct them. For a country to declare war against another nation who harbors Christians with the justification of holy war would imply that the church went beyond blessing the tools of war, which it does. It blesses guns, it blesses bullets, so that its undertaking may be the holiest it could be, which is what we do, and that the church was against itself, which is theologically impossible. So that's why there cannot be holy wars. Here's where the analogy between a person and a nation breaks down. People will be judged by God and their worldly authorities. Nations don't have a proper judge outside the church, since only the church is above nations. So only the church can judge nations, and the church, recognizing that it cannot be a war with itself, could never call a war as a completely holy undertaking, since the only truly holy war is the one against powers and principalities, against the devil, against forces of hell itself. So for a Christian nation to break peace with another nation, it implies subordinating everything spiritually good that it has, and judging it despite it being good because of something that is bad enough that it needs to be judged. Okay, God has not only shown his ability to judge when he destroyed Sodom, But he also showed his extreme mercy when he repeatedly and explicitly spared nations if they showed to have a single good person. The thing is, sin proliferates, it is toxic, it spreads. So, what tends to happen is even the good people become corrupted. This means that truly Christian nations not only ever resort to war as a final measure after escalating tensions that are inevitable in this world. For a Christian nation to break the peace is a reaction to evil from without. However, this is the reality of the world. Evil is persistent and constant, since everything that is not of God is against God, and that which does not gather disperses. So the question about legitimate war is not one of abstract theology, but one of embodied theology applied at every single political particular instance. So this is not to say that we cannot generalize in order to gain a better understanding, but that those generalities would have to disappear into the background the moment we have to actually deal with a situation of this sort. We have to contextualize, just like with any conflict dealing with people. Life in a fallen world requires us to constantly look towards God for guidance, just as we wouldn't try the same cookie cutter solution to personal problems, because it would imply an idol of our anthropology and it would imply, let's say, dehumanizing the other. So, too, with the task of creating a totalizing orthodox political philosophy. As such, it's like, no, no, no. The gospel itself is the political philosophy. Okay, so Orthodox theology is about the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, about personal relationship with Christ and holiness. It is about divine inspiration and personal virtue, not head knowledge, not recalling what saints say. So ultimately, political philosophy from an Orthodox perspective is either a formalized theology meant to edify and awaken other people's conscience to divine truth, or what would be the same, but in a practical lens, a particular expression of Orthodox theology in the realm of politics and personal relationships, an outpouring of yourself in love. So both the sociological and anthropological abstraction and the concrete instantiation must be kept together in order for it to be consistent. Okay, it's not just words, it's not just actions, it's the meeting of the words and the actions. Okay, it is because I want to be consistent that must add that the solution, while the solution to the world's problems is repentance, the very existence of evil will always lead to conflict, and conflict might boil over to war. So, if conflict boils into war, while war is not the solution to a conflict, it is a stopgap against relentless evil, and not an unambiguous evil in itself, but rather a tragic necessity, a lesser good or a lesser evil, a good that is only good to the degree that it does no evil, which is something that it can rarely, if ever, guarantee, or at best, a good insofar as it is the lesser of two evils, which is justice in a practical fallen world. Okay, God allows us to do the lesser of two evils, okay, and call it a good because He's merciful. And that is what, let's say, the proper understanding of justice and mercy meeting on the cross means. It is a sacrifice. That is what being a Christian is. This is also why there is no conflict between Christianity and monarchy or imperialism, understood in the sense of promoting good rule rather than mere centralization and expansion for themselves. Any truly orthodox imperial power has to recognize the good in others, so it would not apply undue pressure simply to undermine the rules of good neighbors just for the sake of subduing them. It's not trying to be very cheeky and like looking at a chink in the armor and saying, okay, this is my opportunity to overthrow them. If the rule was good, there would be harmony, just as it is with good neighbors. It's like the anthropological reason orthodoxy can withstand war and law itself, which is the use of force, is that it understands that law is necessary, force is necessary to help correct bad relationships because authorities are necessary. But it also understands that law or force are not the foundation of relationships. The sword of the state is an element which expresses the nation's inherent being, not its source. The foundation of every being is Christ. Okay, so thank you for watching. That's going to be all for today. Under 20 minutes, perfectly. Thank God for everything. So thank you for watching. God bless.